All right. Hello, friends. I'm Jim Keenehan with AFS 401k Retirement Services. As some of you may know, each year we hold a fundraising event to support local DT charitable organizations. And one of those organizations is So Others Might Eat, commonly referred to as their acronym SOME, S-O-M-E. Sadly, of course, this year we were unable to hold our usual event, but we've been able to find other ways to give back, and we want to continue to get the word out about SOME and the incredibly important work that they do in our community. So today, I'm honored to be joined by Mr. Ralph Boyd, the President and Chief Executive Officer of SOME, for this fireside chat. Now, we may not necessarily be together right now, Mr. Boyd, in front of an actual fire, but I spoke with you last week, and I think it's very safe to say that that you're pretty fired up about what the future holds at SOME. But without further ado, Mr. Boyd, how are you today?
Good morning, Jim. I'm great, and let me just start out by saying that was some intro.
Thank you, and a great.
No, I'm great, Jim, and you said fired up, and that's probably fair and accurate. All in, engaged, fired up, all of those things apply. So thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. So just to get started, I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit about SOME, the organization's mission, and why it is so important in our area.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm happy to do that. So for those who aren't acquainted with us, the best way to describe us is a mouthful, but we do a mouthful. So we're a comprehensive, multi-dimensional, interfaith, affordable housing and human services organization. So the way to think about SOME's mission and SOME's work is that if someone is vulnerable, if they're at risk of homeless, if they are poor, underserved in any ways, and they have need, SOME has a door that serves that need. We typically like to say if you're in need, there is no wrong door at SOME. So when I talk about us being multi-dimensional and comprehensive in terms of our human services, so we do a multitude of things. We provide emergency services for vulnerable people. In addition to that, we have healthcare services that are comprehensive. We run medical, dental, and behavioral health clinics. We have addiction treatment programs for substance use disorder. We have a robust, affordable housing platform with enriched services for the folks that live in our affordable housing units. We have a certified employment training program and an academic enrichment program that's attached to that. We also deal with food insecurity issues, so we run food pantries, distribute food to people who are in need. So when I say there's literally no wrong door, whether it's housing, whether it's food security, whether it's healthcare, whether it's any kind of counseling, training, we do it. And if it's something that someone has a desperate need for that we don't do, we're very able to connect people with organizations and service platforms and networks that will address whatever need they have. So there's no wrong door. People are often introduced to us through our food program, through our dining service. But as I said, we do it all from healthcare to housing to just about any need someone has. We will meet the need with no questions asked.
So that's a lot of stuff. How are you able, as an organization, how are you able to, I guess, ensure that you are doing all those things efficiently, and what kind of experience maybe are you bringing to SOME to help with that?
So what I'd like to think I bring to the table is I've been a lawyer, I've been in the corporate business world, I've been a diplomat, I've been a banker, I've been a prosecutor. So I've had the point of all of that is I've had an opportunity to see how things work in a variety of different high demanding contexts. And so I think what I bring is kind of the perspective of leadership from a lot of different angles and a lot of different disciplines. in a lot of different sectors, from business to government to nonprofit, both domestic and global. What I'm happy to say is that, and I've said to our team here, and we have over 400 employees at some, and we have thousands of volunteers, of active volunteers at some. But what I like to say is that in a world that is increasingly demanding yet commoditized, both in terms of products and services, one of the few ways you can really distinguish yourself and differentiate yourself is your talent. I think talent is decisive when it comes to being able to achieve business and mission outcomes. And as I've said to our team here, and I've said loudly to those who are our stakeholders, both within and outside of some, that I think our talent compares favorably to any I've seen in any sector, in any discipline in which I've had the privilege of being engaged and serving in. So I think when it comes to strategy and execution, what's required to make that work is talent, culture, and capital. And I think we're blessed at some to be robust in all three of those areas. I think historically we've proven ourselves able to raise capital, deploy it really, really effectively and efficiently with our talented team. And as we go forward into the next decade of some, we're 50 years old as of this month. As we go forward, we're going to look to continue to grow some in all of those dimensions that I talked about, all those service dimensions, but we're going to do it in a rational, informed, data-driven way, with both qualitative and quantitative inputs kind of directing us as to where we need to go to meet the most critical unmet need that continues to be out there, notwithstanding all that we're doing and notwithstanding all that so many others are doing in meeting the needs of vulnerable people.
So you mentioned capital raising, which I'm kind of curious to know how some accomplishes that. And then I guess kind of a side question, with that capital, I would just I would love to know some of the numbers of, people served, what kind of problem is even out there that some is trying to address. I think that would be really helpful for us to kind of get a better scope of why this is so important.
So thanks for that question. I mean, it's a big question, and I'll try not to take an hour to answer it. But we're there most fundamentally to alleviate homelessness and poverty, and all of the elements that contribute to it, as well as all of the consequences of it, which is why when you look at the various dimensions of our service lines, it's why we do so many things, because the body, mind, and spirit have to be well for people not just to be sufficient and self-sufficient, but ultimately to be prosperous materially, emotionally, and even spiritually. So it's why we do all the elements of the healthcare piece. It's why we do the food security piece. It's why we do the counseling piece. It's why we do the job training and academic enrichment piece. And it's why we put a roof over people's heads with enriched services in a continuum of care context, so that all those services I referred to are available to and accessible by the folks who live within our housing. So shelter, food, education, training, health are all dimensions of what we try to do to make people who are vulnerable or hurting whole, and make them productive for themselves as well as their families, and then acknowledge the radiating positive consequences that has for the people around them, their family, their neighbors, their communities ultimately, and then acknowledge the intergenerational impact it has by moving one person from real desperate need to self-sufficiency and prosperity. Doesn't just affect them in the moment, it affects all those that come after them in their kind of generational ladder, if you will. When you talk about revenue, one of the blessings of some is a consequence of our successfully executing our mission in these and delivering the various services and creating the housing for vulnerable people to live in with all these services. So what that's bought us is committed donors. It's bought us the confidence of government, of institutional social investors, of individuals who give us anywhere from $5 to $1,000 online. It's gained people's confidence. So one of the reasons that we're able to sustain an organization that is as diverse as ours is, and I think when you and I talked before, Jim, I mentioned to you that if you were trying to build some from scratch today, it would be almost impossible to do it if you approach some philanthropy venture capitalist and said, hey, I've got this schematic in my head for this great organization. It'll provide medical, dental, behavioral care for people, addiction treatment, job training. It'll build housing with continuum of care services and all these things that we do. They would tell you, hey, go whittle that down to about 10% of what you just told me. Focus on what you're really good at, and then come back to us and maybe we'll provide you with some seed or operating capital. But some's already there, it's already built. So the idea is, how do we sustain it and grow it? Because in the nonprofit world, it's no different than the business world. If you're not growing to meet more need, you're falling behind. And so we want to continue to grow to meet that unmet need. And one of the reasons we're able to do that is we have diverse recurring revenue streams, which is what any business, whether it's nonprofit, you got to do the business right to be able to do the mission well. You need to have recurring revenue streams that are diverse. So we have a robust fundraising element to what we do. We raise a lot of money to fund the services that we provide. We also, because we are developers, we build affordable housing units. We get some income from developer fees to do that. We get income, we get capital to build what we build through government programs like the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. We get subsidies from the local DC administered Housing Production Trust Fund that provides equity capital for us to build things. We get reimbursements from government. We get operating subsidies for various things we do. We get reimbursements from insurance companies for services that we provide in the healthcare space. So we have a lot of different revenue streams, but as always, we're always chasing more, because the more we can chase, the more we can do. And the more we do and scale up to do, of course, efficiencies come with that, efficiencies from scale, but also efficiencies from, we just get operationally better as we grow. We're constantly refining how we do things and the processes and protocols that we use to do them. And then we focus as well on being as technologically agile as we can be, which has served us very well in the context of a pandemic. So all those things are elements of us being able to provide services for up to 15,000 people a year through those various service lines, from housing people to seeing them in our medical clinics to having them arrive at our food pantries and receive food distribution, to being served in our emergency services platform and format. So all of that allows us to do more. But the point I would leave with folks on the podcast is that no matter how good we are, no matter how efficient we are, no matter how efficiently and effectively we deploy the dollars and the people, the human and the financial resources that we have, we're still chasing need here in the district. There is always more need than we can serve. So we understand, biblically that we'll always have those challenges. We understand that from history. We understand that from the moment. But we also understand that at some we're called to continue to chase that need as well, and as effectively and as determined and smartly as we can.
Man, 15,000 a year is incredible. And those different services that you mentioned, I can't help but think about how many of those require face-to-face personal contact. You mentioned the pandemic. I'm curious to know how this COVID-19 pandemic has impacted some, and what kind of changes, how have you been able to adapt, and potentially what do you kind of see moving forward through this pandemic?
So thanks for asking that, because it allows me to say, first of all, we have a brilliant team. So when I gather and assemble our operational leads, we're all over the moment, but we're all over building for the future as well. So while we're adjusting and adapting to serve people effectively, and in some instances, even more people during a pandemic, and to do it in a responsible way, we're also planning for the future. So while we've adapted and adjusted to the pandemic, we're also doing a 5-year strategic plan at the same time. Well, a couple things. One, you correctly point out that a lot of our services have to be in person. If you're treating somebody in a clinic, you need to be face to face. Now, that doesn't mean where we can move our content to a virtual platform. We've done it with grace and effectiveness. So, for example, in the medical care space, we now execute a lot of our appointments through the telehealth platform, which is a virtual face-to-face platform where our clinicians can meet with people through a platform like the one we're on. But there are some people that need in-person care and treatment, and we do that in a way that's consistent with the safety guidelines. So we're fortunate we have plentiful protective gear, so our clinicians are wearing that gear. And as people come into our facilities, they are socially distanced in the way that they need to be. And then when they're up close and personal with the clinician is well outfitted with protective equipment to make that interaction as safe as it can be. But obviously it is, this part of our team are frontline folks, they're frontline workers, and they are of course more at risk than others who aren't in those situations. But we have taken every precaution with them, and I'm delighted to say that our infection rate has been staggeringly low, both among staff as well as clients and as well as the residents of our affordable housing units. And we've got over 1,000 here in the District of Columbia. So part of it has been great planning, great skill, great execution. We would, because we're a faith-inspired organization, we would say Providence has something to do with that, and probably the grace of God has something to do with that. But also, there's a certain element of luck as well, but you, to some extent, create some of your luck, and we think we've done that. So the bottom line is, what can be done virtually? For example, substantial elements of our employment training programs, telehealth in the medical care space. What we can do virtually, we have done. We've been able to get the physical hardware into our clients and patients and residents' hands. We've been able to get Chromebooks into their hands. We've been able to get them to a point of digital literacy so that they can actually access all of this program content virtually. And it is gone much better than I would have thought, if you'd asked me 9 months ago that we do this, how much agility we could have, how much both in terms of volume and quality of our services we could push through a virtual portal. I would have not guessed that we'd be able to do it at the level of effectiveness that we have.
I mean, I think that just speaks volumes to the people and in the planning that went into all that. So that's really impressive.
I said, Jim, I have talent. I juxtapose our talent to anybody's, and I don't mean that in a boastful way, but I mean, I feel confident that I'll put my team next to your team and I'll be confident.
Yeah. Well, I know.
And I know your team is great.
I know some of your team
I know
members
your
too.
team's
So.
great. So.
I have to say, Mr. Boyd, you kind of glossed over what I would consider a fairly illustrious career. I know that we are here to talk about some, but I feel that it's really important for people to get an understanding of who you are as a person. Obviously, as the president and CEO, I think that people want to know what type of leadership you're bringing to the table. But I would just really love to hear more about your journey. And you can start as as young as you want, take as much time as you want. But I just would love to maybe kind of hear about some of those critical stops along the way that sort of led up to you now taking over at Some.
So it's not very straight line or linear, the walk through my resume. And I'll just say this before I do that quick walk, and hopefully a fairly modest walk through it, is that, some years ago, I was on a panel of CEOs and corporate CEOs. Corporate CEOs or C-suite people largely made up the panel. And we were talking to like 200 young people who were aspiring to do a variety of different things. And one of the first questions the moderator, there were like 7 of us on the panel, the moderator asked us, to talk about our path to where we were. And I sat there, I was one of the last ones, and I was laughing to myself saying, my path is such a zigzag and so non-linear. I will be spectacularly unique on this panel. Boy, will I be cool and interesting. And by the time they got to me, it was stunning that all the CEOs had a similarly zigzagging path. So it's not a particular linear world anymore where, oh yeah, we see what that path, it's A, B, C to D, it's people do a lot of different things. And I think one of the things you see with a lot of leaders these days is they've had diverse experiences. And it is that the diversity of those experiences that have kind of enriched their leadership skill set. Jim, I just lost your picture.
I did too. Why
yeah, all right. Well, it won't stop me from talking, but I'll feel less because I can't see you. So a couple things. So I've led a pretty rich professional life and been blessed to do a lot of things. I'm trained as a lawyer. I was a trial lawyer and appellate lawyer for several years. I was a federal prosecutor for about a decade, prosecuting homicides, bombings, narcotics trafficking, gang violence. Was mob prosecutor as well. Then from 2001 to 2003, I was Assistant Attorney General of the United States during the time of September 11th and had the opportunity to do many things. But one of the things I was responsible for was kind of working with a lot of our allies and around the world, trying to manage that intersection between our counterterrorism strategies and human rights principles. I've also been privileged to serve in the corporate world. I was an executive vice president at Freddie Mac. I was general counsel for a while. I was an executive vice president for community relations and development, and I was CEO of their corporate foundation. I've had leadership roles in the nonprofit space. I've chaired an affordable housing development nonprofit, national nonprofit for a number of years. I've helped found with some others a charter management organization that runs a series of inner city public charter schools that are character-based and rigorous academically. I've run some other nonprofits. I've been an executive at the Red Cross. So I've had a chance to do a lot of different things, but I guess as I start to come down the backside of my career, I find myself at Some as energized or more energized than I've ever been because of the robustness of this mission. I think if you were to look at my resume, kind of one of the unifying themes in that resume is the fact that whatever I've been doing, whether I've been well compensated to do it or not so well compensated to do it, there is an element of service and of trying to lift people up and lift people up in the sense of providing them with the tools that they need, not to just be sufficient for themselves, but to be prosperous for themselves and their families and for those around them. I have a deep sense in this concept of community, that we're not just in for ourselves, but we're in for the whole. And that's kind of infused by my thinking and my career path. And so SUM is a perfect place for me to be at this point in my career, kind of being able to bring all that legal and business and diplomatic experience to the table to grow us at a time when, notwithstanding all the challenges and crisis in our world, from the COVID-19 pandemic to the what I'll call the justice crisis that we have right now, I think SUM is certainly not, in any stretch of the imagination, the only answer to those crises, but it is one of the answers, one of the concrete ways, one of the concrete vehicles people can commit some of their time, treasure, and talent to, that will really go to lifting people up and going to address in really concrete ways some of the fallout and consequences of those crises that we find ourselves facing as a community, as a collection of communities, and of course as a culture and a country.
Thank you for that. And I feel like you sort of nonchalantly go through your resume a little bit, and I would encourage other people out there to look at Ralph's bio, learn more about him. In a nutshell, there's nobody on earth more qualified to lead SUM. So I'm very, very excited about you taking over there.
Thank you, Jim.
What could you just tell me a little bit about, now you've been there for a while now, kind of an interesting while since you've been there. Tell us a little bit about the future of SUM. We talked last week and you had some pretty exciting plans that you shared with me, and I would love to hear about that again.
Yeah, thank you. So as I told you, we're in the midst of not just budgeting for 2021, but thinking strategically about what the next half decade will look like, should look like for SUM. This is our 50th anniversary year, so, and I'm a relatively new CEO, been here 7 months, so it really is time to think about what this next decade will look like and what we can bring to the table with our very substantial resources, both our human capital, our people, our talent, as I talked about, but also the assets that so many of our stakeholders have been generous and I hope thoughtful in giving us access to. So as we put together that strategic plan, I've asked our service leads to really think about how we should grow based on what the most critical needs are that's out there that is not currently being met, but is in space where we're good and effective in, and have the opportunity to do it because of our skills, because of our subject matter expertise, because of our skill sets, and because of the resources we can bring to bear. What are those areas specifically where we have that, where there is the need to grow and we have the opportunity to grow because of our talent and because of what we believe is our ability to raise and sustain the capital necessary to do it from a CapEx perspective, but also from an annual OpEx perspective, from a budgetary perspective. So I've asked our leads to think about that, to think about it quantitatively, but also to think about what the qualitative narrative surrounding the discussion about growth should be. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think I shared with you, Jim, some confidence that we would certainly grow our housing portfolio, because we all know that in the nation's capital here, and in fact in any major or moderate-sized city in America, there is always much more need for affordable housing than there actually is affordable housing stock. So if that's all we were doing, if we were just chasing the opportunity to build more housing and that's all we did, we wouldn't come close to meeting what the need is. So we know that need is intense. We know it is one of the most critical things that we do, providing safe and stable shelter for people and an opportunity for them to receive services through the platform of that shelter. So we just know that's an area of great need. We have a really crack team that really knows how to develop affordable housing from the planning stage to putting together the financing stack to being able to access the capital through the various government subsidies. I mentioned the low-income housing tax credit program. I mentioned DC's Housing Production Trust Fund. I mentioned operating subsidies from governments and other institutions. I mentioned reimbursements and developer fees and all these kinds of things. So we're really good at doing that. And when we build housing, you don't just get the great, stable, quality housing, but you get all the services that go with it. So I have no doubt that portfolio, our housing portfolio that's currently at about 1,300 units, 1,000 of them are operational and the other 300 are in some stage of planning and development. I think I don't think I'm getting too far ahead of myself by saying I'd expect us to try to get to that 2,000 number within the next 5 years. So in order to do that, that also means that not only will we be developing more housing, but we'll need to grow our family, our individual, and our senior adult services that go with that housing. We'll have to increase the capacity of our healthcare platforms, our medical, our dental, and in particular, our very robust behavioral health platform. We also expect to grow our CET program, our Certified Employment Training Program. And I mentioned to you that that's a program that's highly effective, that is unique nationally, that we're currently pushing a couple hundred people through a year and getting them jobs in the construction trades and in medical services. But there's also an academic enrichment piece to it, which is unique. We've been able to transform substantial elements of that program to a virtual platform while getting those, handheld devices in people's hands so they can access that online content. We've now figured out how to deliver the hands-on piece safely in the context of the pandemic. So we expect to grow that program. That's real jobs, real living wages for people who previously were unemployed or underemployed chronically in many instances. So we expect to grow that program. And of course, I mentioned, I think before when we were talking, the continued need for better food security. And I think I told you that during the pandemic, at various points during the pandemic, we've experienced a 600% increase in demand for food. And we've been able to flex up to meet that increased need. So that's part of the acumen, the agility that I think our team has here. And we're able to do it because of the talent we have. We're also able to do it because of the assets and the resources our stakeholders and the trust our stakeholders have reposed in us to be able to do that. So going forward, that strategic plan, grow housing, grow services, flex up on our employment training programs, have our emergency services components keep up with all that. So it is a growth trajectory. We look at our mission business here like we would look at a for-profit business, and that is if we don't grow, we fall behind. So we want to grow, but we want to grow in fiscally responsible ways. And we're in the process of building that strategic plan that will inform us about how to do that, what our priorities for growth should be, what we're the best at doing, where we can achieve greater efficiency through scale, technology. Can we have more effective joint ventures, partnerships, even be acquisitive in some space where there may be smaller organizations out there doing great work but don't have the scale or the capital raising abilities to sustain their work at that level. Maybe there's something we can do with them. So literally everything's on the table. We're starting to get inputs from our operational leads. We'll be distilling that information over the course of the next couple months, iterating about it and kicking out what I think will be a challenging and dynamic strategic plan for the next 5 years.
That is one heck of an ambitious plan, I should say. My
Well, I'm
last
talking
question.
the talk, we'll have to walk the
Yeah,
walk,
that's right. I have
So-
confidence that you will. My last question for you, probably the most important one. How can people help?
Thank you for asking. So obviously, we always need people's financial participation. We've been really fortunate with what stakeholders, donors, partners, friends have done for us during the pandemic. People have been generous, but we need them to sustain their financial support throughout all 4 quarters of this year. Because even though we've been enriched with an uptick in donations, we worry that some of that uptick is just people moving what would be 4th quarter donations forward. So we need to sustain the level of giving throughout the 4th quarter that we've experienced in other years, so people can certainly donate financially. We are more careful about our volunteers right now. Obviously, in the midst of a pandemic, we have to do things differently with them now. But people can figure out how to help us financially by donating, or the opportunities for volunteering. So all that can be accessed by going to www.sum.org. That's how people can help us. Go on our website and donate, or figure out some way to give us part of your time, your treasure, or your talent, because we'll appreciate it all, and we'll try to optimize every bit of it.
All right, well, Mr. Ralph Boyd, President and CEO of So Others Might Eat, thank you very much.
Hey, thank you, Jim, and thank you, AFS. You guys have been great partners for us for a very long time, and we appreciate your investment in us, and we'll continue to try to earn it going forward.
Well, our pleasure. Thank you to everyone out there listening. If you're interested and fired up as I am about Ralph and the future of SUM, please reach out to AFS or directly to SUM if you'd like to support this very important organization. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.